It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic. We're losing our freedom in the land.
Welcome to the Republic for the United States of America. You may call me Kelby. I am an American. Today is the 4th of April, 2016. Tonight's RNN featured show is called Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. The RNN, which stands for Republic News Network, has been doing these calls for about 6 years, and it's always been a friendly introduction for the people of the United States Corporation. It's true, the United States is a corporation and their exclusive jurisdiction is in the District of Columbia, and you can find this information in the law under Title 28, Section 3002 and UCC 9-307H. The Republic government was just a bunch of U.S. citizens that realized that we all wanted to become Americans. We've been working hard now for 8 years and have successfully re-inhabited the original government vacated under Abraham Lincoln in 1861. I know it's hard to understand, a little difficult to believe, but don't worry. We are law-abiding, peaceful Americans and very pro-government, and you can consider the Republic members are tired of the corruption. See, we found in the law that there is, in fact, two forms of government here on our land, and we did something about it. We are the people, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. We have families just like you. We simply found some truths, and we want to share these truths with the rest of the world. Get ready to hear things that sound amazing, and get ready to understand that you too can be a part of history. We do welcome you, and each one of you, to the Republic for the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, please bow your heads in prayer. Father God, we want to thank you for this opportunity to serve you in a capacity of re-inhabiting this lawful de jure Republic for the United States of America. Lord, just bless this call, bless the people on it, and help us and guide us in all that we do, and we pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Mr. Dan Happel, I yield the floor.
Thank you, Kelby. I appreciate this. We've got a great show today. We've got two guests that I really admire, and I have a great deal of respect for. A gentleman by the name of Patrick Wood, who has written a wonderful book called Technocracy Rising, and he also has a website called Technocracy News, technocracy.news. Patrick has been involved with the Agenda 21 program for some time. He's done a number of conferences, and he's got a website that's second to none. And also on the line we have Debbie Boscalupi. And Debbie is a personal friend of some years back. We started working together on the wolf issue in Montana and the western United States, and she was involved in the production of a movie that dealt with the wolf issue, and since then she's been involved with a lot of Agenda 21. She was at the COP21 conference over in Paris, France in December, and had a tremendous amount of information that she shared with us at the Freedom Force International Congress that was held in Paso Robles, California, the 8th through, I believe, the 12th of December. So anyway, Patrick, are you on the line with us now?
Yes, indeed I am, Dan. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to kind of lead in and let you give a little bit of a background on your history as far as some of your information on your resume.
Well, you bet. I started writing about globalization back in the late 1970s. I wrote 2 volumes or co-authored 2 volumes of Trilaterals over Washington with the late Anthony C. Sutton. And I've been studying globalization and the globalization process ever since. We were, at that time, and now that Tony's passed, I guess it's up to me, but we were the de facto experts on the Trilateral Commission in those days. And I have continued to follow this organization up through today, and it did lead me indeed into the area of technocracy, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. And this can pretty much be laid at the feet of the Trilateral Commission, in my opinion. They set out in 1973 to create the new international economic order. It was all over their literature. And now we know what the word new really means. It didn't mean just a rehash of Keynesian economics. It meant basically a brand new economic system that's never been tested, tried, or studied in particular on the world stage. And so that's kind of how I got to where I am today. I do a lot of speaking, a lot of radio programs, a lot of writing. My website, technocracy.news, is a living story of stories that I cherry pick from around the world that deal with technocracy so that people can really get an understanding of what we're talking about. We're not just talking about it in a vacuum and trying to show people. This is what they're saying, folks, and we need to pay attention to these people because they're everywhere, it seems like. So I hope that will be a good enough intro for now.
That is really good, Pat. And also, I wanted to mention your book, Technocracy Rising, and I know that book came out, I don't think it's been out too long, maybe a couple of years ago.
Just last year. It's been about a year and a month now.
Okay, well, I know I read it right after it came out, and it's a really good reference and historical work on how technocracy is nothing new. It's been implemented already in the past, and such wonderful leaders as Adolf Hitler and some of the other folks that use technocracy as a way to control people. And that's a pretty good lead-in right there. Debbie, are you on the line too? Doesn't sound like she's on the line. I might try to.
Yeah, I guess not.
Sure. In any case, let's lead into the first thing. I saw a wonderful article that you had on your website, technocracy.news, about the Chinese control grid. And I'd like to we'll discuss that in particular, but I'd like to maybe start out with the discussion of how control grids can be used in totalitarian systems to monitor and control people's actions.
Well, yeah, in China today, which is very much a totalitarian state still, it's not rightly called a communist dictatorship anymore because they are very oriented towards technocracy. But they are perfecting the art of surveillance and categorizing people according to the surveillance that they have automatically done by software algorithms, of course, artificial intelligence. They're perfecting this technology in China, and what's happening there is absolutely astounding because a lot of the technologies that China has that it has no fear to use are patently illegal in the United States. So what many of the companies did that are providing this new technology, they couldn't use it here. They couldn't put it into effect here in police departments and so on. They shipped it overseas to China, and China said, thank you very much. We'll take this and expand it, test it for you, whatever. And we can fully expect that this technology is going to be re-imported back to the United States now that it's being perfected. And in the United States, I'll say that monitoring and surveillance are the key words here of this decade for sure. Scientists and engineers that would like to run the world cannot do so without a monitoring system in place. That's just the way engineering works. If you build a factory, you have to have a monitoring system to gauge exactly what's going on in the factory at all times. And way back in 1938, the Technocrat magazine gave us a great short definition of what technocracy is, and I think it'd be right to lay this out at this point so people understand the context of this whole thing. This is what they said they were back in 1938, and I quote, "Technocracy is the science of social engineering the scientific operation of the entire mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population, close quote. Now that lays the groundwork for what technocracy is. They were scientists and engineers who were dedicated to the idea that capitalism was going to collapse and die, and that they and they alone had to reinvent an economic system that would be appropriate to control the whole, whatever it was, the whole social mechanism that was in view. They planned on a science of social engineering. That means the scientific method would make decisions on society, not politicians, not people, not the citizenry, but the scientists would make the decisions. And the economic nature of this is stressed by the fact that it talks about distributing goods and services to the entire population. This is something that communism never achieved, socialism never achieved it, National Socialism never achieved this. But now this technocracy movement is seeking to literally take over 100% of the means of production and the means of consumption. And so technocracy is very pervasive, is very insidious. Most people just don't get it because they don't like economics in the first place. You know, it's the next boring subject to history, probably, for most people. But this is what has been sneaking up on us for the last 35, 40 years, thanks to the Trilateral Commission bringing it back to life in 1973. And now we're suffocating under the surveillance, the command and control stuff that they're trying to pull on us because of it. And basically, they're just getting started. And I say they're just getting started. It's like, wow, really? Well, yes, because how much data does a technocrat need? And he will answer you just a little bit more. So, there is no limit to what can be collected on people. The more the merrier. And that's what we see happening in China today with this control grid nonsense.
Sure. And I guess what I'd like to see you do, Pat, is get into a little bit more of the detail on how they are actually implementing the control grid through the computer systems, through our communication systems, and all the various ways that they can implement that technology.
Well, indeed, it's already really. I should say a lot has already been achieved in America by itself. China is taking it to an art form, but we're pretty advanced as well. You've got the NSA, the CIA, Department of Homeland Security. You've got the entire intelligence network of the United States working together in unison, harmony, to collect data on American people. And our legislature has slapped these people down multiple times in the last 6-7 years. They bow their head in shame for about 15 minutes, and then as they go away, they expand the very programs they got slapped down for. And so today we have an intelligence system that's collecting data nilly-willy on Americans, basically all of your financial records, all of your healthcare information, all of your education information, all of the information from your emails, your telephone calls, and other forms of communication, all of your social media posting and stuff that you've done that gives them a psychographic view of you. And a master profile has been built on people in America that literally just choke a horse. These people know more about you than you know about yourself. And part of the great risk of this is, I have to say, is that, as you know, data is never a certain thing. If you get a little bit of bad data infecting good data, will it ever get better? No. As the Bible says, a little leaven will leaven the whole lump. And so as error is introduced into data, like let's say there's an error in your folio, you can't get rid of that error, but you're going to be pinned with it potentially for the rest of your life. So the massive amount of surveillance that's being done today is just a fact of life. It's all in the open. There's no conspiracy here. Anything I'm saying, this is just a fact of life today, what these people have done. And when you go back, people still wonder, well, why do they have to do all this? Is it just about breaking down privacy or what? Well, that's part of it. But if you go back to 1934, when the Technocracy study course was written, which was really kind of the Bible of technocracy in that day, the engineers that created it wrote down 7 requirements that were necessary for technocracy to work. And this, I'll read you the first four or five. It's very short. Number 1, quote, provide a specific registration of the type, kind, etc. of all goods and services, where produced and where used. That's number 4. Number 5 is provide specific registration of the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual. Now, they didn't have the technology to do this back then. They were just getting started with the IBM tabulator. I think it was called the Hollerith back in those days, the first one. They didn't have the technology to pull this off, but they do today. And these are the exact same requirements that are being applied today to profile everybody in the system. It's absolutely amazing. You say, well, that could have been written last year. And it could have. Mm-hmm. The first 2 requirements are not even as oblique as the ones I just read. The first 2 requirements they listed, quote, number 1, quote, register on a continuous 24-hour per day basis the total net conversion of energy. Number 2, quote, by means of the registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load, close quote. Now, these 2 requirements are the very embodiment of smart grid. That is the electronic meters that are going on the sides of homes and businesses to do what they call, invariably, well, we need to balance the load. That's why we need this new technology. But the new technology is able to spy on your home, collect data on your home, when you're home, when you're not home, what kind of appliances you're using, how often you use them, what's your pattern of consumption. And so these first 2 requirements are being 100% met by the implementation of smart grid in our country today. Now, between those 2 requirements, smart grid and what I call the total surveillance society, you can see how it fits into historic technocracy like a hand in the glove. This isn't going to go away. This has been brewing for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And that just kind of gets us started on the idea of command and control. These people want to engineer society according to their scientific method, their scientific formulas. And, like they said in 1938, it's the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism. And one of the big risks in this definition is there's no mention of any parliamentary function whatsoever. And the early technocrats in the 30s made an appeal to FDR, that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to declare himself dictator, dismiss Congress, and simply implement technocracy straight off. They had no use for politicians. They had no use for parliamentary process. They had no use for the constitutional, constitutional republic. They would have dismissed it all if they could have. Thank God they didn't.
Well, you're right, Pat. And incidentally, it's interesting to me that when it didn't work with FDR and in the United States, they took that same system over to Nazi Germany where it would work. And in fact, they used much of that same technocracy to control the citizens of Nazi Germany and then much of Europe when they were in control of those other countries.
That's correct. It's exactly right. It's a huge story in itself. There might be another book in that someday. People don't like history, but I kind of do, and I might want to just write another book just to have it. But it's an incredible story, and it would just stand your hair on end what these technocrats did during Hitler's reign. They enabled everything that he did, including the gas chambers and the trains, the scheduling of trains that took people to the gas chambers, the tabulating and collating of lists and stuff who would be on those trains. All that stuff was created with technology from the West, and it was fueled by this technocrat mindset that the German engineers just took to like ducks take to water. They really did. And at the end of World War II, it's interesting. I don't even remember if I mentioned this in my book, but the end of World War II, when all of the war criminals were carted off to Nuremberg, where many of them got the death sentence and life imprisonment and so on, the technocrats disappeared from Germany under a top secret program called Operation Paperclip that has been declassified in the last few years. Operation Paperclip brought 1,600 of these top technocrats back to the United States, sanitized their resumes, if you will, put them into top positions in science and engineering labs and stuff around the country and the military. And most of them lived out their lives and died and retired and died in the United States of America. An incredible.
No, that's correct. And as a matter of fact, Pat, I will mention that Werner von Braun, the father of the V1 and V2 program rockets in Nazi Germany, was kind of the father of the space program in the United States.
He absolutely was. If it were not for him, we would never have put a man on the moon.
That's amazing.
You're exactly right. It is amazing. So the technocrats from Germany had a big family reunion, I expect, when they all came back to the United States, and were reunited with their buddies that they knew before the war and exchanged information before the war on technocracy. They were probably all glad to get back together again, but it makes you want to vomit at the same time, doesn't it?
Well, it really does, and I know there's a reference, and I believe the gentleman's name was Schmidt. He was the head of IG Farben Company, which was a big chemical producer in Nazi Germany, and he ended up being tried at Nuremberg, and he spent some years in prison because he was the inventor of Zyklon B gas that they used in the gas chambers that killed so many of the Jewish people. And when he got out, he was put to work at the UN by Julian Huxley as the architect of the system known as Codex Alimentarius, which is a system of figuring out how many calories a human being needs and implementing a program that controls food consumption.
You're absolutely right. It's a small world, isn't it?
It sure is.
It really is. And this would probably be if Debbie were online. I don't know that she clicked in. But,
I'm here, Pat.
I'll be darned she's here. Well, Debbie, let me lead you into this, and we'll get her in the discussion here. In 1992, as you know, the Earth Summit was held in Rio de Janeiro. And out of that meeting was produced a book called Agenda 21. And that was the agenda for the 21st century. And I'm sure you've talked about that before. I know you have an intimate knowledge of that book, what I'm talking about. But let me tell you the rest of the story on the Agenda 21 conference in 1992. Before that, ending in 1987, I believe it was started 1983 or so, there was a commission that was started by the United Nations. It was called the Brundtland Commission. And it was chaired by a European lady by the name of Gro Harlem Brundtland, Bruntland. The United Nations has openly admitted and praised the work of Gro Brundtland in bringing Agenda 21 to the forefront in 1992. She produced a book out of that study called Our Common Future, which is still in print. It's still out there. It's not a myth. You can buy it on Amazon, and I suggest people do for like $8 or something. But Our Common Future laid out all of the doctrine for Agenda 21 that ultimately showed up in 1992. Well, Gro Harlem Brundtland was a member of the Trilateral Commission. And this is an organization that we have been trailing, Sutton and I have been trailing since 1977. And the Trilateral Commission was dedicated to creating a new international economic order. And by the time they were done planning their nefarious new system, which was technocracy, they made sure that Gro Brundtland got into this position with the United Nations to write this study to introduce this doctrine of Agenda 21 that we have today. And I will suggest and propose that Agenda 21 was a 100% doctrine or policy created by members of the Trilateral Commission to transform the global economic system into something that they envisioned starting back in 1973. And that's why we're talking about technocracy today. So, Debbie, there's your lead-in to Agenda 21 to tell us just how bad is Agenda 21. And should anybody care?
If I just said really, really, really bad, would that be good enough?
Well, I guess.
No.
How about really, really bad? A little more inflection there. Really, really
Well, you know,
bad.
the other thing about Gro Harlem Brundtland is she was the first female prime minister of Norway. Very, very powerful woman. In 2012, I went to the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. It was the Rio Plus 20 conference, and it was called the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. And because I knew exactly who Gro Harlem Brundtland was, I went to one of the meetings where she was leading the conversation. It was a panel discussion, and it was about how children, health, and women would be intimately involved and crucial to implementing United Nations Agenda 21, and they called it sustainable development around the world, and how we needed women to even the playing field. It was extraordinary. I went up and shook her hand and said, wow, I'm impressed. And of course, it was just to shake her hand and say, I know I've met this evil person. And I do think, Patrick and Dan, this is an evil plan. This plan goes into every aspect of our lives. In fact, President Clinton created Executive Order 12852. One of the books that was written by the President's Council on Sustainable Development is a book called Agenda 21. I don't have it right in front of me right now, but on page 6 and 7, when I do presentations mostly in the Western United States, in fact, Patrick and I do presentations together. I think we are a 1-2 punch. And Patrick does the history, and then I go into some current examples of where we're seeing Agenda 21 and how, as a cattle rancher, we're seeing Agenda 21 play full out, including what happened yesterday, which was the announcement for the largest dam removal project in worldwide history. But on page 6 and 7 of a book called Agenda 21, the Earth Summit, it's something about the Earth Summit. You can also buy this book on Amazon.com. It was edited by Daniel Sitarz, S-I-T-A-R-Z, with a foreword by Senator Paul Simon. And what it says on page 6 and 7 is that the implementation of Agenda 21 will be unlike anything the world has ever experienced before, a shift from financial resources to everything that humans do, saying specifically that every human action has an environmental consequence. So we're breathing right now, we're using technology, we're talking, all of that is a human action. And it goes on to say that every human action will require individual and collective decision-making at every level. So every human action, collective decision-making at every level. One of the examples I like to use is Obamacare. Obamacare, they are pushing towards universal health care, a one world healthcare system. Well, in the United States, we are already experiencing that. They are doing a great job implementing Obamacare, no matter how disastrous it is. But now that means that when we are sharing, we are at an individual and a collective decision-making level, it is now my business, because I'm helping pay for your medical costs, it is now my business what you eat, how much you eat, what you smoke, where you live. All those things are now my business. And so to me, that is, it's invasive, it's scary. It also lands into data collection. It goes into land use. It covers every aspect of our existence on Earth. And hearing you talk about data collection, Patrick, I just received, and Patrick knows about this because we talked about this, I just received a survey. Actually, it's a census, which we're only supposed to get every 10 years. It's called the American Community Survey by the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's the U.S. Census Bureau. And I'm told right here that if I do not fill out this form, if I don't complete it, I can be fined as much as $5,000. By law, it says that it's mandatory. And the questions that it goes in and asks me is like 49 questions about my residence, where I live. Does my house have hot and cold running water? Does it have a bathtub, a shower, a sink, a stove range? Does it have stairs? What kind of computer do I use? What kind of internet do I use? What kind of internet service do I use? All the way down to the cost of my home, how many acres it is, what car I drove to work, how long it took me, where I work, the address of where I work. All of this is none of your business. But if I don't fill this out, I could be fined, and they're going to send census workers knocking on my door trying to data collect from me. This, if you're just learning about Agenda 21, I know all of us on this call beg everyone to start looking into this, because this is unlike anything we've ever experienced before.
Let me throw out a caution at this point. And by the way, Debbie, your sentiment was a little bit different when you first told me about that survey, but don't say that on the air. It was a little shocking, I have to say. Let me give a caution to anybody that's listening to this so far. I have heard this from people, from their mouth. When they hear the message that we're giving to people, they say, "Oh, well, I'm smarter than they are. I will just make sure that I opt out." They can't find everybody, right? So I'll just kind of go off grid, and I'll zig when they zag, and I can somehow keep myself out of this network. But let me tell you that the United Nations has made a huge issue out of this with this new 2030 agenda that was passed late last year, that they use this word inclusion, inclusive society. And I have seen this. I've been researching this, and I've been looking at this word very carefully to see what do they mean by inclusion. Well, basically, when they look at all the different societies in the world, they are intending to get 100% of the people shoved into this Agenda 21 plan for the 21st century. There will be nobody left behind. Now, I use that phrase, nobody left behind, because you see that in their own writings time and time again. You heard that, by the way, with George Bush, with education, no child left behind. They are dead serious about this. They're saying there will be nobody left behind, and that means they're going to force you, whether you dodge or not, doesn't matter. They're going to grab you by the shirt collar, and they're going to throw you into the system, whether you like it or not. So my caution is, and warning is, don't think that you're going to skate on this, because you're not. We're all in this together. We're in the same boat together, and we will all sink together if we don't figure out how to rescue the ship totally in the first place, you see. So anyway, that's my piece on that.
Patrick, you're absolutely right on this, and the one thing that everybody has to realize with the implementation of all these things under Agenda 21, under COP21, and under Agenda 2030, Technocracy, all these things evolve around one very central point, and that is we're in a world that has moved from individualism, from the rights of the individual in the United States, to a world of collectivism, and most people don't even see it. And under this system, we are submitting the rights of the individual to the collective. And under that system, you can control anybody because it makes it against the law to be an individual.
That's about it. The value that you have is not based on you being an individual in these people's minds. It's based on your value to the common good. And I put that in quotes, common good.
Hence the reason Common Core, our common future, it's all about this common resource, common earth, us being one big, happy global family.
That's right.
That would work too.
That's right.
You know, Patrick mentioned the 2030 agenda, and it's interesting that, you know, we have Agenda 21 and they flipped it to the 2030 agenda. And I encourage listeners to go to the White House fact sheet on the 2030 agenda. And just as Patrick said in the very first paragraph of Obama's commitment to global development, building on over a half century of U.S. leadership, it says on the second sentence, the adoption of the 2030 agenda, which sets out a global development vision and priorities for the next 15 years, captures the hopes and ambitions of people around the globe for meaningful change and progress, including here in the United States. Through the adoption of this historic framework, the United States joins with countries around the world in pledging to leave no one behind by ending extreme poverty and prioritizing policies and investments that have long-term transformative impact and are sustainable. Under the Obama administration, the United States has committed and helped mobilize more than $100 billion in new funding from other donors and the private sector to fight poverty in the areas of health, food, security, and energy, basically every area of our life. In the United States, the adoption of the 2030 agenda coincides with a growing bipartisan consensus on the importance of global development and direct philanthropic contributions from the American people, and it goes on, and then it goes on to say how this also coincides with the Paris Accord, COP21, that you just mentioned, Dan. So, but just like Patrick said, they pledge no one will be left behind. And if I can throw this in about the scariness of the 2030 agenda, by the year 2020, this is one of the 169 targets within the 17 goals of the 2030 agenda. By the year 2030, they have targets along the way, and some of them are by the year 2020. For example, by the year 2020, in less than 4 years from now, to cut in half the number of traffic accidents and traffic deaths from automobiles. How are you going to do that?
You're going to get rid of cars. That's the only way to do it.
The other is all ecosystems, waterways, river systems are under the control of the United Nations by the year 2020. Mm-hmm. So this fits right, the largest dam removal project in worldwide history that was just announced, and we've been fighting it for over a decade now, which is full of holes and lies, and yet what they're using is the scientific method. Remember, this is dictatorship by science, and we hear all the time the science is settled. That's what we've been hearing on the Klamath River. And in fact, scientists have been fired for questioning the science that the government is using because it's full of holes. It doesn't match what the environmental impact report and studies should say. It says, you know, that the government is giving itself a path to killing species for the next 60 years as 20 million cubic yards of pollutants sludges its way 187 miles out to sea. By the year 2020, they want to start removing these dams, the largest dam removal project in worldwide history. It matches the 2030 agenda.
I would like to add to that, just for a little salt and pepper on the recipe here, that dam removal as a policy was originally started during Bill Clinton's administration when Bruce Babbitt was the Secretary of the Interior. Bruce Babbitt, along with Clinton and Gore, were all members of the Trilateral Commission, And it was Bruce Babbitt who first wrote down and put in stone the policy of dam removal in the United States. We're seeing it finally coming to a head, a big boil, if you will, especially up on the Klamath River Dam. And who knows where this is going to end, but that's where it started. And and I just stress this because everywhere you look around what we're talking about, you see members of the Trilateral Commission showing up. They're kind of like that whack-a-mole game, at the fair. You hit one, and three others pop up in other holes, and you got to hit faster and faster to knock them down. This is absolutely amazing that these people keep showing up in this whole picture. It's completely, you couldn't put odds on that because there's only about 150 members from the United States ever at any one time. You could not conceivably calculate odds of that happening by random chance.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry, you're absolutely right, Pat, and I will say something, Debbie, you're probably aware of this, but our ex-governor, Schweitzer, refused to recognize hydroelectric power as so-called green renewable power. And the reason he did is because he was part of the coalition trying to remove dams. And if he recognized that hydroelectric, which is the cleanest, best renewable energy in the world, and certainly the most reliable, then they wouldn't be able to justify being able to take these dams down. So
the other thing about
anything.
They will, and the other thing about dams, and behind every dam is a storage lake. This project is in California. What is California famous for right now? Our drought, right? Well, besides cap and trade and leading the way to all this radical environmentalism, because I think it's because we have a governor who was at the very first Rio Earth Summit, Jerry Brown, and at that time he was a candidate for president. But besides, leading the way on all of this stuff, we've got the 2030 agenda specifically says this about the water systems, and it says, and I want to quote it because I said, it was to be taken over by the United Nations, and that is true, by the way, by the United Nations Environment Program. It says by the year 2020, protect and restore water-related ecosystems. Water-related ecosystems. What is not a water-related ecosystem? I don't know, because rain falls in many places, and they're trying to now monitor or control the rain that falls on your roof, saying in some cases that you don't own that water. So protect and restore water-related ecosystems, including mountains, forests, wetlands, rivers, aquifers, and lakes. Basically, all water, or all water. But behind every dam is a lake, a storage, water stored. And when you say renewable, Dan, you're not kidding, because of all the things that we use that water for, drought control, fire control, irrigation, feeding ecosystems, recreation. I mean, that water is used in many ways, and they're saying that dams and the storage lakes behind them and the clean green energy that comes from them is not renewable energy. This is crazy making. It makes you just shake your head and say, who's running the show? But like Patrick said, it's technocrats. And the first time I heard Patrick talk about technocrats, and one of his solutions was, it's hard for me to get my head around, because when I hear, technocracy and scientific dictatorship, for me it's hard. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a big brain person. I could put pieces of a puzzle together, like on Agenda 21 and all this environmentalism, and say the big picture is very scary, people. But when Patrick, I've heard several of Patrick's presentations, and in fact, we were in many conferences together where he would speak before and do the history, and then I would follow up with Agenda 21, and we're the 1-2 punch. And people always ask us, what's the solution? And Patrick said to us, I heard him say, you need to call technocrats out. And I said to myself, yeah, right, like I'm ever going to meet a technocrat. No kidding. My very next presentation, which was in Grass Valley, California, full room, wanting to hear about Agenda 21. At the end, I have, people come up and talking to me, and someone pulled open their wallet, and where your driver's license would go and be protected was a technocrat card with the yin-yang type symbol that Patrick told us about and said, this is what you want to watch for. And I called him out, and I called Patrick right away and said, you're never going to believe this. When I was in Paris at COP21, I had the pleasure of talking to people like Lord Christopher Monckton, Willie Soon, all these scientists, Dr. Isvan Marco, all these scientists who the United Nations and the International Panel on Climate Change want to call the climate deniers and want to throw them in jail. I was interviewing Dr. Isvan Marco, and I asked him about technocrats. And he's from Belgium, by the way. He's a scientist from Belgium. And he told me that, you know what, Debbie, right now, and he knew I was a cattle rancher, he says right now there are technocrats in the EU who are deciding right this very second how much protein human beings should eat. And he said, and it's not protein from meat. He said the protein will come from insects, from beetles, and insect flour. And then I asked Dr. Isvan Marco, where do they stop? And he says they never stop. They will never stop.
Wow. That's a great lead-in, Debbie, but I would like to have both of you folks talk about how so-called climate change is being used as a tool to gain control of the economy, private property, and the whole system of American jurisprudence.
Yeah. I'll take a stab at it first, then Debbie can take a stab at it. Well, let's take a cannon volley. Forget stabbing. That's not traumatic enough. The essence of technocracy, which is sustainable development, green economy, and so on at the United Nations, is an economic system that's intended to displace capitalism and free enterprise altogether. And you realize America would not be here were it not for free enterprise and capitalism. We would be a third world banana republic, like, I don't know, I won't name any names, but you can name your own. We would not be here as a country today. We would not be a great country were it not for the economic system that we had with capitalism and free enterprise. The head of global warming at the United Nations, Christiana Figuers, she said in a press conference last year, I believe in February, I listened to it myself and I watched her lips move. She was speaking English. She said, quote, "This is the first time in the history of mankind that we're setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution," close quote. Now, she's laying it out. Climate change is not about the environment. Climate change is about a sea change in economics. That's the purpose of climate change, is to scare the people half to death and then offer them a solution. That's, the Hegelian dialectic at its best. You work up fear, and then you offer them the only possible solution that they can take that will alleviate their fear, which is sustainable development. So climate change is a scam of epic proportions from the get-go. It's always been a scam. It has never not been a scam. The stated purpose, from their own lips, is that it's intended to drive people into sustainable development. That's the answer. And that, of course, is the economic change, the economic transformation that we see in the world today.
If I can add to that, Patrick, on November 13th, 2010, Dr. Ottmar Edenhofer with the International Panel on Climate Change, he said, this is an exact quote, "We redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that, and get this, One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore. They're now admitting that this is not about the environment. What Patrick was talking about with Christiana Figuers is a total takeover of the economic system that has been reigning over 150 years. Who was Christiana Figuers explaining this to? In 2015, she was talking to investors in Montreal, in Canada. They were at what was called they were signing on to what is called the Montreal Pledge, which is investment companies, the stock market, retirement systems, like here in California, CalPERS and CalSTRS, the largest retirement systems, and teachers, retirement system, and then government employee retirement system. What she was begging them and telling them that they must sign on to is something called environmental social governance. Environmental social governance is exactly like sustainable development. But where it includes in businesses, I hope I'm explaining this well, the only difference is that it adds the governance part, which is for businesses. So now they're including businesses and the stock market. Why the stock market? Because they need to be able to afford this whole new sustainable agenda, sustainable development agenda. And with the stock market, they were saying that's like over, $150 trillion that they could pull from the stock market if they can get major companies like Coca-Cola to divest from fossil fuel and methane producing greenhouse gas emissions, change their manufacturing practices, force behavior change in not only consumers but also businesses, that they could successfully implement Agenda 21, the 2030 Agenda, and the COP21, the Paris Accord, and get agreement. Because what Christiana goes on and explains is, if we do not do this now, she's forewarning them. She says, if we do not do this now, another 10 years, we could lose this battle. And just extraordinary.
Isn't that something? Something I'm going to add to this too, guys, is that the same Christiana Figuers that made that statement at Doha conference at Qatar in 2012, and this is a direct quote too. It must be understood that what is occurring here, not just in Doha, but in the whole climate change process, is a complete transformation of the economic structure of the world, a centralized transformation that is going to make life for everyone on the planet very different. Isn't that amazing? Very different is right. It's just absolutely amazing that anybody that looks at this would not just drop their jaw and say not just no, but heck no. You would think that they would see through it in a heartbeat, but they don't. It's just amazing to me that people don't get it. But by 2030, these people want to reduce extraction of carbon resources to zero on the whole planet. I doubt they're going to do it, but that's what their goal is today.
Zero emissions, zero waste.
That's right. They have no way on the table today to make up the energy deficit that will result if they're successful, because only about 25% of reliable alternative energy right now is being generated. That means there's a 75% deficit that has to be made up between where we are today and where they're going to take us in just a few years. And they have no answers. They have nothing on the table whatsoever. And I heard Bill Gates, who is the big technologist, talking about renewable energy and talking about how, the future and stuff like that. And he had the gall to say, as he concluded his remarks, that they're hoping that, hey, technology marches forward, right? They're always discovering new things. You never know what they're going to discover next year. He said at the end of his talk, we're hoping for a miracle. That's what he said. They have no answers. None. He says we're hoping for a technology miracle to happen.
to make up the deficit in energy that we are creating. How can people let that pass? I just don't get it.
They have no answer on that, Pat, but they also, and this is the bottom line, and I don't think a lot of people believe this, but this is also in all of their writings, they plan on reducing the world's population by at least 90% to make it a sustainable world. Well, people say, well, what are they going to do with all the people if they do all these things? Well, they basically can starve the people to death. And if they're in charge of our food system, our financial system, they're in charge of everything. They can control the consumption of every aspect of our lives. They can get rid of a lot of people in that circumstance.
Well, they certainly can.
I know that sounds radical, but that, I believe, is the key to the whole thing, and that leads into one of my last questions before we kind of wrap this up, and that is, how do you think this immigration issue and ISIS is being used to implement Agenda 21 policies?
Oh, my.
I'll take a stab at that. We are seeing what is called regionalism happen. And we're noticing, as farmers and ranchers and people who live in rural areas, we are noticing the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, all these different non-constitutional laws, regulations, whatever fees, whatever fines, whatever you want to call them, created by non-constitutional bureaucracies. We didn't vote for the BLM. We didn't vote for the DOI. We can't even fire people within these departments, which is not representative government, which is what the United States is supposed to be. So we are seeing in rural America, you can bring into what happened in Oregon recently with the Bundys and Lavoy Finicum. Those people, those protesters, those activists, whatever you want to call them, were doing everything under the Constitution that they could. Who was lawless was the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Interior. So we are seeing a group of unelected, and in our cities we are seeing what we call Council of Governments, like in the Bay Area, a group called the Association of Bay Area Government. If you're in Denver, it's called Dr. Cog, Denver Region Council of Government. Thank you. And what we're seeing is a group of unelected officials making decisions for planning and zoning and building within regions, mega regions, which forces people to live in mega regions where city and county borders disappear, because we become one big region, 9 counties, 101 cities, all one. This overlaps into Southern California in the SoCal region. Where you look at the SoCal region, you see that it overlaps into Mexico. And Patrick, I'm going to hand it off to you and clean it up.
Yeah, thanks. I want to say that I wrote an article earlier this week that's available and posted on technocracy.news. People can go and read the article and get all the details on this. But the name of the article was Sustainable Development, Migration, and the Multicultural Destruction of the Nation State. And in the article, I discuss where the migration policy has come from that has allowed all the hordes of Islamic, invaders, if you will, from the Mideast to come into Europe and literally turn Europe upside down. Not surprisingly, we find a man at the center of this thing. He works for the UN now as the Special Envoy for Immigration, by the name of Peter Sutherland. He's a global elitist. He's a member of the Trilateral Commission. He's the ex-chairman of British Petroleum, BP, and a bunch of other stuff. Managing director of Goldman Sachs International. The guy is the top of his game. And Peter Sutherland has said point blank that the only way sustainable development can be implemented is in a multicultural society. Multicultural society. And he went around stumping Europe to get nations to open up their immigration quotas to receive people in from the Mideast. They had a very compelling argument to twist their arm to do this. And it's absolutely incredible that this man watched Europe literally disintegrate under his eyes. And, when the attacks happened, the horrible attacks happened in Paris, what did the United Nations say? As they came out and they chastised the European nations and said, you better not change your quotas that we've already established for immigration. They said, don't do that. They put the pressure on them to keep the gate wide open. This is Trilateral Commission policy. Again, I'm sorry to say, this is the same exact policy that we have in America, especially with relation to our southern border.
That's correct.
The same thing. There is no difference because the policy originates from the same source, namely the Trilateral Commission.
That's correct. Patrick and Debbie, we're real close to the end of our program. This is going to be a program I've got to have you guys back. We've got to do more of this. But Patrick and Deborah, would you like to give your various information on your websites and how people can find out more about Technocracy and Agenda 21 through information that you can provide?
You betcha. I'll start out by saying technocracy.news is where everything that I have is centered. There's a link to purchase Technocracy Rising, my book, on that website. That's also available on Amazon.com, by the way, and that's an easy way to get it too. But we tell a story with the articles that we cherry pick from around the world on Technocracy. We're telling a story so that people can see what they are saying, not just what we're saying, but see it coming from them. And so there's lots of information on technocracy.news, and there's a contact form on there. You can contact me. You can direct message to Debbie as well if you have a question or whatever. It will get to her. And, that's it. Pretty simple, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Our bios our bios are on technocracy.news. We are available for conferences, for speaking engagements, for radio shows. We're hopefully going to, we could sure use some help in funding because the enemy is technocrats. And unless we go after that cancer, we are just putting a bandage on a scar that keeps on repeating. And we think the scar is, something other. It's cancer. And unless we cut out the cancer, we are going to get tired. We are not going to be able to be. So it's Technocracy, and you can get a hold of us at technocracy.news.
It has been such an interesting program, and you've provided so much information that we must have you back, and we must have you back very soon. And so I will make that pledge that we will continue to have discussions with you on this subject. And thank you very much for your participation in this program, and we thank our guests and our listeners for being part of this program. And please join us again next week for Connect the Dots with Dan Happel, and we will turn this over to you, Kelby, and thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We conclude this call with the Republic News Network. And again, it happens every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific. We encourage you to please go to the Republic for the United States.org. Again, the Republic for the United States.org. The Republic News Network has been broadcasting for 6 years with many, many different people that represent within the United States corporation, from generals to colonels to sheriffs to regular business persons that do have a vested interest in restoring this great nation to how our founding fathers originally wanted it for us. We're going to thank you again. God bless you. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific.